Arabia. We're staying with Saudi Arabia. And by the way, just so everybody, I have no business whatsoever with Saudi Arabia. Couldn't care less.
Lawmakers up in arms about this on Capitol Hill, including Senator Lindsey Graham, telling Sean Hannity that the Saudi regime needs to be put on notice.
Saudi Arabia needs us more than we need them. It's not too much to ask an ally not to butcher a guy in a consulate. This is not World War II, so I'm not going to look away at what MBS did. We've got a historic opportunity here to tell the people in the Mideast there's a new sheriff in town. If you disrespect us and you trample over civilized norms, you're going to pay a price. If you want to keep MBS, that's your decision to make, Saudi Arabia.
Garrett Tenney's live in Washington with more. Garrett, good morning.
Sandra, good morning to you. The president is getting a lot of blowback from Congress for choosing not to punish Saudi Arabia over the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and it's coming from members of his own party, including his friends like Senators Lindsey Graham as well as Rand Paul, who criticized the president's statement in a series of tweets, saying in part, "We should at the very least not reward Saudi Arabia with our sophisticated armaments that they in turn use to bomb civilians." I'm pretty sure this statement is Saudi Arabia first, not America first. Democrat Congressman Adam Schiff said it is inconceivable that the Saudi Crown Prince did not know about Khashoggi's murder, and for the president, quote, to suggest maybe he did and maybe he didn't, or that we are incapable of finding out the truth, or that knowing the truth, our silence can be bought with arms sales, undermines respect for the office of the presidency and the credibility of our intelligence community and America's standing as a champion of human rights. Despite the president's suggestion that we may never know if the Crown Prince was involved, Congress is now demanding an answer to that very question. The heads of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee have sent a letter to the White House to force an investigation into Mohammed bin Salman's involvement. Here's the chairman of that committee, Bob Corker.
We have a Crown Prince that I believe directed the killing of a journalist, and the language that was used, it was as if they were writing a press release for Saudi Arabia, not for the United States.
Under the Global Magnitsky Act, the administration now has 120 days to provide answers to Congress, and at that point, the White House could decide to sanction the Crown Prince. That's something the president hasn't suggested he's willing to do. More likely is that Congress could decide to enact sanctions on its own, since there's been a lot of bipartisan support to make that happen. Sandra and John?
Garrett Tenney, thank you. All right, well, meanwhile, President Trump firing back at a federal judge's ruling blocking the president's order banning immigrants who cross over the border illegally from claiming asylum.
You go to the Ninth Circuit, and it's a disgrace, and I'm going to put in a major complaint, because you cannot win, if you're us, a case in the Ninth Circuit. And I think it's a disgrace when people file, every case gets filed in the Ninth Circuit, because they know that's not law, that's not what this country stands for. Every case that gets filed in the Ninth Circuit, we get beaten, and then we end up having to go to the Supreme Court, like the travel ban, and we won.
Let's bring in our America's Newsroom A-team this morning. Former economic advisor to President Obama, Robert Wolf, is here. Former deputy assistant to George W. Bush, Brad Blakeman, and Main Street columnist for the Wall Street Journal, Bill McGurn. Bill, let's start with you first on this. And clearly, we just heard from the president on this issue, and he is blasting that judge.
On the Ninth Circuit, yeah, I think he has a case. The Ninth Circuit, I believe, is the circuit most often overturned by the Supreme Court. So I think he has a case on that.
But it sounds like the president is pretty upset with this particular ruling, and
Well, look, I think it's like the trial thing. I think the president may be vindicated at the Supreme Court. For one thing, he's not trying to deny asylum. What we're trying to do is at the border get an orderly process to channel people through. I think that's a reasonable goal. You might have different ways to get there, but I haven't seen anyone propose an alternative. What do we do if we don't do this?
Yeah, it does seem that the judicial branch has done has taken on the job of administration in this particular ruling.
Worse than that, they're legislating from the bench. They're taking away the power and the checks and balances. They're not upholding the Constitution. They're violating it. we're now encouraging people to come to the United States, to violate our laws, and then seek our protection. This is not the way the system works. The president will be vindicated in the Supreme Court.
Well, there were two different things going on. On your first thing with respect to Saudi Arabia, I thought what was a bit outrageous is the president's comments that there are $450 billion to $500 billion of deals we're doing with them, and it will increase jobs by hundreds of thousands. AP came out and fact-checked that. That was just totally inaccurate. That maybe it's about $14.5 billion and maybe 10,000 jobs, which is still great, but that's not why you proceed, okay, with this type of non-sanctioned environment. So I think I agree with what the Senate's looking to do. With respect to the asylum process, I agree with Bill. There is a process. The process has to take place. The president has executive actions that he can change if he thinks it's a threat to the United States. But equally, the judge has the right to stop those executive actions, and it will likely go to the Supreme Court. And my gut tells me it will be in favor of Trump at the Supreme Court.
Very interesting. You're in agreement with Bill McKern there. Okay, we want to move on to Robert Mueller and the fact that the president has now turned in answers to these questions. Is Robert Mueller done with the president, Brad?
Hard to say. The one thing about the Mueller investigation is it's pretty much been leak-proof. But in a town that's known for leaking, Washington, I would have to say we would know if there was anything more serious than has been known so far. So I think the president is probably done with Mueller, is what my experience tells me. And the president answered the questions. These are interrogatories, written questions, and he's not going to be deposed.
We know that Mueller indicted those, 13 Russian agents,
right.
and those indictments did not contain any information really about assistance from U.S. persons.
Right.
So doesn't that say that there is no collusion?
Well, we haven't seen anything on the original collusion. I think if he does something, he may try to do it on obstruction, which I don't think is a strong case, but I think it's stronger than what we've seen so far in the others. I think the reason to speculate that he may be wrapping up is if you're investigating an administration, I think the person at the top is the person you want to ask questions last, right? Because you presumably had some answers from everyone else. So that sort of suggests that he might be nearing the end. Also, I mean, we heard before the election that he may be putting it off. He didn't want to be Jim Comey and, come blundering out right before an election with some big news that might affect the election.
Well, meanwhile, the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, telling us what we know, what we don't know. He writes this, quote, "I don't think he has any way to compel testimony on obstruction because the government of executive privilege would be very, very strong. It all relates to a period of time after he was president." Important point to make, Brad. Meanwhile, Alan Dershowitz, who was warned about this being a perjury trap all along, he responded on Fox News earlier this morning. Listen.
But remember, a perjury trap is a trap for the innocent as well as the guilty. You can testify completely honestly. All the prosecution needs is one witness to contradict you. Sure. If that witness is believed by the prosecutor, you have fallen into the trap.
Professor Dershowitz is right. I'm a lawyer. I know that you can innocently respond to either an interrogatory or written demand or testify in person, and it can be construed completely differently and in jeopardy. So I think the president is acting completely right. I think he would be wrong to erode the power of the presidency and the rights that the president has to govern and the protections that he's given. Mm-hmm. So I think he's done everything according to Hoyle as far as being cooperative.
If I can just chime in, I would agree with what John has said earlier. There has been indictments against Russians. There has been indictments against people part of the Trump campaign. What we know is one thing. We don't know what Mueller knows. We know he knows a lot, and I think we need to let it play out.
None of those indictments involve collusion. None of those indictments involve the reason why Mueller was appointed in the first place.
We cannot predict where this is going.
No, but we know what's happened.
We know it's happened.
And we should be
so far.
And we should be glad what's happened so far. Right. People who did a legal thing against this country or illegal things within this country. I think it's gone
for a long time, and the questions are, when is this going to come to an end? And if there is any evidence of collusion, put it out there now. It's been a year and a half going on.
I'd like to see it too.
All right, you were at this Obama event yesterday.
Yes.
You know the president, the former president, intimately.
I had lunch with him at the event.
One of his biggest fundraisers, et cetera, et cetera. You were there, and the former president is saying that racism and mommy issues are contributing to lack of progress in the United States. In his own words, Obama.
We are still confused, blind, shrouded with hate, anger, racism, mommy issues.
You were there.
Listen, you have to first understand the audience. It's an audience of about 500 community organizers, civic leaders, and those people that really are about promoting good. There is a fork in the road in this country. It's clear. You can go down this path of isolationism and nationalism and populism, or you can go down the path of doing good and giving back and civic engagement and community organization, and I'll take the path of doing good. So in my opinion, who he's speaking to, the women of, the Girls Global Alliance, the My Brother's Keeper, there's a whole group of people that are really forming together, okay, young people that want to give back to the society. So I think, this little statement was more or less said in what I would say in some ways tongue-in-cheek.
He didn't name the current president.
Right. Look, I think it's kind of silly. If we're going to talk about racism, I have a mixed race family, and the identity politics, I think, is one of the biggest drivers of racism. So I would throw that in there if I were President Obama, and it's telling that he didn't.
Very interesting, Brad.
Outraged by it. We have the first biracial president who missed a great opportunity to bring this country together because of who and what he was, half white and half black. If anybody has mommy issues, it's the president. I've never heard him talk about his mom, President Obama. And to allege racism and mommy issues, and he was talking about the president, is beyond the pale.
You think that that the president, the former president, I should say, did not mention his mother deliberately?
No, I'm just saying, if anybody has, I've never heard him talk about his mother ever in a public forum.
We should just
so if
be
he's
clear.
alleging somebody has mommy issues, perhaps he should look at himself.
I'm just going to say into the holiday season, you're much better than that. And we should just be clear. You should read his 2 books, which is all about his upbringing.
Let's leave moms out of it and bring the politics back in it. Here he is talking about 2020 and the possibility of Beto O'Rourke and what he thinks of him.
It felt as if he based his statements and his positions on what he believed. The reason I was able to make a connection with a sizable portion of the country was people had a sense that I said what I meant.
Interesting. Obviously, he's seen as a rising star in your party.
Yeah, there's no question, and I was quoted on this in the recent Politico article on him, that the excitement around Beto O'Rourke is probably nothing like we've seen since RFK and Barack Obama. There is a huge electricity in the air. The grassroots just can't wait to support this guy. Whether he will run, whether he will be able to get through a primary, whether he could be our next president, we have no idea. But there is no question someone who is literally a Democrat that has done that well in Texas, there is certainly a national map for him.
But he lost.
He lost. It's hard to stay relevant when you don't have a platform. So what's going to be interesting to see is how does he stay relevant? What does he do? Does he run for office? Does he start a foundation? He's going to have to keep himself in front of the public eye. The question is, what's his next move?
Yeah, I agree. I think also one of the reasons that he's attractive, one of the reasons a lot of Democrats, including President Obama, was attractive when he first ran, is that he doesn't have a record. Really, he was a state senator, so people can project on them things that they want and see what they want to see. I'm a Notre Dame alum, many bad years in football, and you'd always hear the coach saying, well, we've got a great offensive line, or we've got a great quarterback, or a great receiver, and they would still lose. At the end of the day, you've got to put points on the board.
I mean, there's something to say, just to segue off of what Bill just said. The Democratic Party has not elected a president since JFK over the age of 52. So they like young and aspirational. The Republican Party has not had someone under the age of 55. So I would agree, we like hope, we like change, we like aspiration, we like excitement, and and the Republican Party defers to experience, and so we'll see what happens.
We'll see if the Democratic Party defers to experience in the race for speaker and the leadership.
That's a whole different discussion.
And the leadership,
we're gonna need a whole hour for that one.
Experience didn't work out too well the last.
I would respectfully disagree.
Ben McAdams, who was just elected in Utah, says he is not a Pelosi fan. So.
All right, we will leave it there. Thank you very much to our A-team.
That was great. Thank you.
Well, meantime, the acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker in New York City today. He's focusing on terrorism, national security, and the opioid crisis, but also facing new questions about his past employment. David Lee Miller, live at the Joint Terrorism Task Force headquarters in Lower Manhattan with more on that. David.
John, that's right. The acting attorney general, Matthew Whitaker, comes to New York today as new controversies surface regarding his past. According to financial disclosure statements that were released late yesterday, Whitaker, while serving as the executive director of a nonprofit organization, was paid over $1.2 million in salary over 3 years. That group, the Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust, also known as FACT, stated mission on its tax-exempt tax filing says, and I quote, "The organization's purpose is to work for accountability, ethics, and transparency in government through investigation, research, and legal process and education of the public in these issues." According to public documents, FACT had only one other paid employee. Public records tell little about the group's donors. While executive director of FACT, Whitaker was an outspoken critic of the Robert Mueller Russia investigation. Whitaker's critics question how his previous views could impact his role now as the acting attorney general, who could curtail or limit the scope of Mueller's authority. Whitaker faces numerous legal challenges. Democrats argue his temporary appointment is unconstitutional because he was never confirmed by the Senate. The Trump administration says Senate approval is not needed under the Federal Vacancy Reform Act, which lets Whitaker keep his job up to 210 days. Yesterday, President Trump was asked if he would consider making Whitaker the permanent attorney general.
He's doing a very good job. Everybody tells me that Matt Whitaker's doing a fantastic job. So, we'll have to see where everything goes. But everybody tells me he's doing a fantastic job.
And in a little more than 1 hour's time, Whitaker is going to speak here at the Joint Terrorism Task Force headquarters on the subject of national security. John?
David Lee Miller. David, thank you.
Fox News alert: a major recall of romaine lettuce in effect across the country.
Know exactly where this product was grown is one, or that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg of ill people, that the number of ill people may well grow substantially.
What you need to know to keep your family safe. We will have a live report coming up on this next.
Also, heavy rains could spark another disaster in hard-hit California, bringing the threat of flooding and mudslides to the fire zones. More on that next.
We didn't know for about 4 or 5 days that the house survived. Then we were happy that it survived. Then we got out to see that there was damage. Now we're trying to make sure.
3 bodies found inside a Monmouth County mansion owned by 50-year-old tech company owner hours after fire swept through that house. According to one report, his body was found outside the home with a gunshot wound that does not appear to be self-inflicted. The bodies of his 45-year-old wife, Jennifer, and their 2 children discovered inside.
We are investigating this as an arson, an intentional fire. They were burned severely as a result of the fire that they were exposed to. So that's making things somewhat challenging with the medical examination that needs to ensue. But just stay tuned, we'll get there.
The nearby home of Canero's brother Paul, also the scene of a fire on Tuesday. Investigators have not determined if those are related.
Meanwhile, onto this Fox News alert on the California wildfires. Crews in Butte County are in another race against time. They're searching for more victims before heavy rains move in, sparking fears of flash flooding and mudslides.
The weather that's expected is definitely going to impact operations. It's especially during the recovery. Working with the Sheriff's Department and first responders. Again, we have additional resources out there really trying to work ahead of these storms.
Jeff Paul live in Paradise, California. Jeff, how is the rain going to impact the search and recovery that's currently in progress?
Well, yes, Sandra, search and recovery teams are working as fast as they can to get through all of these burned out properties to help identify as many victims involved in this campfire. They're expecting the weather to turn, and those heavy rains could only further complicate efforts out here to identify all victims. Now, the number of dead currently sits at 81, with the number of unaccounted for also going up, where it sits at 870. Firefighters are also preparing for up to 6 inches of rain over the next few days. And while that rain can help out, put out those remaining spot fires, it could also lead to mudslides and flooding, possibly washing away any evidence of human remains. And with the soil being so loose, winds are also a concern for crews, adding even more danger to this operation.
We have a term called look up, look down, look around. So there'll be a safety guy in each group looking up and watching the trees while the guys are operating. If we start to see them move in a way that we're concerned, we'll call them off to search and bring them into a safe area.
Now, crews tell us they're trying to get that number of unaccounted for down. They say it's a very tedious process. In some cases, they're finding that names are on the list twice or they're misspelled. And in some cases, when they finally contact people, they don't even realize they were on that list. And they say they left this area well before the fire started. Sandra?
Horrible situation there, Jeff. With Thanksgiving tomorrow, how are all these people that have been displaced going to deal with the holiday season?
Yeah, it's really incredible. In our drive in today and this morning, you can see signs out that say things like Paradise Strong or Paradise Will Rise Again. And the people who have lost everything, their spirit is incredibly high. We were at the hotel yesterday, and you wouldn't even know that these people lost everything, their entire houses. So it seems like neighbors are helping each other out. Those who didn't lose everything are helping those who did lose everything. And as far as first responders, firefighters, police, and the search and recovery teams, when we talked to them about the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday, they say this is what they signed up for. This is what they do for a living. And they say being here of all places gives them even more appreciation for everything they have to be thankful for. Sandra?
Jeff Paul in Paradise, California. We wish all of those displaced the best.
President Trump's decision to stand firmly behind Saudi Arabia following the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, well, that's drawing fire from Republicans and Democrats.
Meanwhile, the president moving the Russia investigation forward, submitting those written answers to Robert Mueller's questions. We've got new reaction to that and more in Washington with what is happening now on this. Catherine.
Well, thank you, Sandra, and good morning. The president's legal team issued a brief statement confirming the president's written responses are now with special counsel Robert Mueller. Significantly, the questions dealt with Russia-related topics and not the firing of FBI Director James Comey as part of any obstruction investigation. Quote, it has been our position from the outset that much of what has been asked raised serious constitutional issues and was beyond the scope of a legitimate inquiry, Rudy Giuliani said. This remains our position today. The president has nonetheless provided unprecedented cooperation. President's legal team also emphasized that so far they have provided more than 30 witnesses, 1.4 million pages of records, and now the president's written responses. Shortly before the confirmation from his legal team, the president fielded reporter questions on the White House lawn.
The written answers to the witch hunt that's been going on forever. No collusion, no nothing. They've been finished. Finished them yesterday. The lawyers have them. I assume they'll turn them in today or soon.
President also gave a very public defense for his choice to lead the Justice Department, at least temporarily, Matt Whitaker. And that appointment matters because, of course, he now oversees Robert Mueller and the special counsel investigation, Sandra.
So the big question, Catherine, is this the end of the Mueller probe?
Well, a leading constitutional law expert, Jonathan Turley, told Fox News that it may not be the end if there are any inconsistencies between the president's answers and previous testimony in the hands of the special counsel. In an op-ed, Turley wrote, quote, if Trump answers with any specificity, his responses will be overlaid with the testimony of a host of cooperating witnesses, from former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn to former Trump fixer Michael Cohen. If statements by Trump do not match up, Congress will then be left with a stark choice over who is lying on the issue. A Republican in the House says he believes Robert Mueller wanted the written answers but will not really be finished until he gets to sit down face to face and ask the president questions.
That is to say, they're not looking for a criminal act and seeing who caused it. They're looking to see if President Trump did anything wrong. And that's just it's kind of backwards here. But I really think we're at the point where they're going to wrap it up. But I do think they're going to press for an interview.
Source close to the Trump legal team has indicated to Fox News that they felt that if Mueller had a very strong case against the president, or circumstantial case, he would have issued a subpoena to force the issue of an in-person interview. But as you know, that hasn't been the case as of yet, Sandra.
Catherine Herridge, thank you.
All right,
You're
so
welcome.
For more on all of this, let's bring in our headliner, Ari Fleischer, a former White House press secretary and Fox News contributor. So if you were in this White House, would you consider the danger has passed now? The answers are in. Mueller has his paperwork.
I would guess that the process is likely coming to an end, but the conclusion of that process would have me scared to death. Because you still don't know. You just don't know what Bob Mueller is going to decide. If he decides that he's got a legal case, a criminal case, an impeachable case, he can make it. If he says there's no collusion, he has no case, then you're home free. But nobody knows other than Bob Mueller.
But still, you've had Alan Dershowitz and others lay out the fact that a perjury trap is for the innocent as well as the guilty. So just because the written questions, the answers have been turned in here, Ari, doesn't mean that Robert Mueller may not still want and need to sit down with the president and have him answer questions face to face. That could still happen, right?
That's my point, Sandra. You know, every expert who is on the outside has their expertise, and I value it. But the truth is, nobody knows what Bob Mueller will decide to do. And nobody knows what Bob Mueller knows, what he's gathered, what he hasn't gathered, what contradictions he's found, what contradictions he hasn't found, whether anybody else is in his radar that we haven't even talked about yet. That's the fact of one of these prosecutions. And unless you're on the prosecuting team, it's guesswork. It's expert guesswork. But that's why if I was on the inside, I still would be nervous until you hear from Bob Mueller, because nobody knows what the path is other than that man.
Well, the president's team seems pretty confident. Rudy Giuliani, of course, is one of his lawyers. Rudy Giuliani, in an interview with Axios, said, "I don't think they," meaning Mueller's team, "have any evidence of collusion of any kind. I think their obstruction case as a legal matter doesn't exist." So, again, the White House exuding confidence here.
And I think that's to be expected. If you're innocent, that's exactly what you do convey. And so that isn't, to me, entirely credible, particularly on the collusion side, whereas we all know if there was evidence of collusion, it would have leaked a long time ago, and we would know it. The obstruction issue is an opinion. If the president's lawyers, in their opinion, say there is no case for obstruction, none, the president can fire anybody he wants, that's their opinion. They're entitled to it. It's a well-grounded opinion. But the only opinion that matters is Bob Mueller's. If Mueller's opinion is that he's seen evidence of obstruction, then he can move on that front. And that's why, again, I'm not indicating it's one way or the other. I'm just saying that if you're in those seats of power next to the president and you want to protect the president, the honest answer is you don't know, and you must wait for Bob Mueller. And like I said again, if Bob Mueller comes out and does just what the administration is telling us, that no collusion, no obstruction, Donald Trump is home free, and a huge number of people are going to owe him a huge number of apologies for putting him and the nation through this mess.
We'll see if and when that happens. Meanwhile, Ari, a lot of talk still about this Washington Post report about Ivanka Trump and the use of her private email to conduct official government business. Her lawyer is hitting back against what they are calling misinformation that is being peddled in the press, alleging that hundreds of emails were sent on that private email. But the newspaper story, when you go through it, it cites people familiar with records who reviewed them amid this public records lawsuit. Still, they contain no indication that any of the emails contain classified or sensitive government material. Reactions pouring in, including the president. He weighed in ahead of leaving for Mar-a-Lago yesterday. Listen.
Ivanka did some emails. They weren't classified like Hillary Clinton. They weren't deleted like Hillary Clinton. What Ivanka did, it's all in the presidential records. Everything is there. There was no deletion. There was no nothing. What it is a false story. Hillary Clinton deleted 33,000 emails. She had a server in the basement. That's the real story.
There are important distinctions to be made here, Ari.
Look, this is nothing compared to what Hillary did. That is absolutely an invalid comparison. So the issue here is Ivanka's behavior. Forget Hillary. Was it appropriate or inappropriate, right or wrong? And here's where I come down on that. Go right to the facts and use your common sense. If we're talking about hundreds of emails sent, I receive about 200 to 300 emails a day. I probably send 50 to 100. So let's say low case for me 50, and now it's hundreds. Let's say 500 were sent. That means for 10 days, she sent emails. 10 days? I think that's entirely reasonable in a transition for somebody who didn't know the rules to try to learn what the rules are. If it was me, I never would have sent one personal email because I worked in the White House. I know better. Somebody from the outside, if they did it for 10 days, for crying out loud, that is not trying to get around a system. That's getting ready, learning the system, and then obeying all the rules. So use some common sense here. If this was thousands or tens of thousands, then I think you have a real pattern that lasted a long time if we're trying to get around the rules. This sure doesn't sound like that to me.
Let me turn your attention real quickly to the situation regarding Saudi Arabia. The president is clearly not in the mood to implicate Mohammed bin Salman in the murder of this journalist. Even though the CIA has pretty conclusively decided that he was behind that murder. What do you say about the president's stance here, Ari?
You know, I think, frankly, this is what an outsider president is capable of doing. And he's doing essentially what all predecessors would have done, but using totally different words to do it. You know, for 50, 60 years, the United States and Saudi Arabia have had an uneasy friendship, marked by a lot of tolerance of things that are not Western, not modern, things we don't like. But we acquiesce to it, we accept it. In this case, the president just put out a raw statement that contained no values, nothing about enduring American values, right, wrong, things of that nature. I wish he had spoken differently, but he's right. President Trump is right, particularly given Iran. There are other strategic interests here. And what do the critics want? Beyond the sanctioning the president's carry out, do they want us to break relations with Saudi Arabia? Do they want us to topple Saudi Arabia? Do they want us to dictate what the succession should be in Saudi Arabia? I've yet to hear the critics say exactly what Donald Trump should do. So I think he's trying to maintain the strategic, bigger picture in the Middle East, knowing that the Saudis and many nations around the world sometimes do abhorrent things. But are we severing ties to Russia? Are we severing ties to China? Are we severing ties to probably 1/3 of African nations that engage in abhorrent behavior in terms of domestic dissonance? Yeah. It's a tough issue. I think the president is doing the right thing and using the wrong words to do it.
Ari Fleischer, thank you very much for coming on the program on this Wednesday before the holiday. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
All right, enjoy. Meanwhile, on that note, a food safety alert just in time for the holiday. Check your fridge for romaine lettuce. The CDC warning consumers to not eat it. Jonathan Hunt, live from Los Angeles with more on this. We all eat a lot of this stuff. What's wrong with it?
Yeah, it's a big issue, Sandra. The alert from the CDC is unusually stark in its warning, saying, quote, CDC is advising that U.S. consumers not eat any romaine lettuce and retailers and restaurants not serve or sell any. They're also advising that all romaine that any consumer has be thrown out, including any salad mixes containing any romaine, and all shelves or drawers where it might have been stored should be washed and sanitized. The CDC says the bad romaine can lead to E. coli infections, and 32 people across 11 states have become sick in the latest outbreak, with recorded cases from October 8th to October 31st. Of those 32, 13 have been hospitalized, with one patient suffering a form of kidney failure. Now, it's important to point out this is a separate outbreak to the romaine-linked E. coli outbreak that lasted from March to June of this year. 210 cases were identified in that outbreak across 36 states, and 5 people died. Then the outbreak was traced to Yuma, Arizona, but this warning is unusually broad because the CDC has not at this point been able to identify where the infected romaine is coming from.
FDA is trying to determine the source of the romaine lettuce, but right now there's been no common grower, supplier, or brand of romaine lettuce. So we want people to not eat or buy any romaine lettuce, and that includes whole head romaine, hearts of romaine, romaine that could be in a salad mix, while our investigation continues. Also, if you don't know if your lettuce is romaine lettuce, then just don't eat it.
So bottom line, do not eat.
The host of Making Money. I hope I just said the Dow finished down over 550 points yesterday. Yeah. Here we are. We're in the green this morning, up 90 points, but it's a holiday shortened week, so you could get some big swings, blah, blah, blah. Well, what is the big picture here for markets now? Negative for the year.
Slightly negative for the year. The big picture are the unknowns more than anything else. And what's coming up this month, we may get some of them addressed. For me, the biggest issue has been the Federal Reserve. I think President Trump is right with respect to Jay Powell. Jay Powell made a speech on October 3rd.
everyone go to October 3rd, see where the market was that day and see where it's gone since then. We are afraid, people who are in the market, who really understand the market, that the Fed could crush this because the Fed has the power. What the Fed could do to the economy is 1,000,000 times more impactful than tariffs.
Explain to people what that means. Why would the markets be worried about the Fed's next move? Because they're going to tighten the money supply.
Well, because they already are. Like what the Fed did to save the economy under President Obama was create $4 trillion out of thin air, and they kind of pushed that. They created the money and pushed into the economy to buffer us and bring us back. Now they want to take it back. They're taking $50 billion a year out of the economy. On top of that, they're making rates higher. So it's going to cost more money to get a car. It's going to cost more money to buy a house, more money to start a business. So all of those things at the same time could really have an amazing negative impact on our economy and certainly in the stock market.
Larry Kudlow, who is one of the president's, well, I guess he's chief economic advisor is his title, says he doesn't see problems down the road. Listen to what he had to say.
The basic economy has reawakened, and it's going to stay there. I mean, I'm reading some of the weirdest stuff, how recession is around the corner. Nonsense. My personal view, our administration's view, recession is so far in the distance, I can't see it.
Wow.
Well, certainly I don't see it next year. I don't see it perhaps even the year after that. The problem, though, is what people are saying, okay, oil prices. Oil dropped 28% in less than a month. You know, okay, we understand supply and demand dynamics, but some of that could be implications. But it's more than the U.S. economy, though, right? What Larry is saying is if you look at 7 million job openings, if you look at wages going up, if you look at U.S. productivity, if you look at all of the things, the underpinning of the economy, they don't turn on a dime. Typically, success builds success builds success. So I agree with him that we have this very strong economic momentum, but it's not so strong that there's no fragility. Housing, for instance, has been a weak point. And so these are the things that, again, it gets back. There's only one person out there, one entity that can crush us right now. That's the Federal Reserve.
You often hear Larry Kudlow at the White House say, give this a chance, whether it's talking about the tax cuts or the rollback of regulations under President Obama or just let this economy breathe is what you hear a lot from them. We're watching markets and we're watching the growth.
I mean, we need to let it all work out. But you know what? It's our job to watch it minute to minute. And sometimes
Happy
it's too
Turkey
much.
Day.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Charles.
See you.